Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to start another online session on benign lesions of the uterus. In the past, excuse me just a second. किसी को बिठा देना।
ओके
आप चेक कर लेना कि कर्सर मूव हो रहा है कि नहीं।
मैंने ऑन कर दिए। मैंने ऑन कर दिए।
ठीक, थैंक यू। बस फर्स्ट स्लाइड कर दो, स्टार्ट। ठीक, थैंक यू। Good morning, all. Sorry for the delay. I was just asking them to adjust the cursor so that I can point out some diagrams. So, in the last sessions, which were held in April, we were discussing what was the health of the uterus. And in the health of the uterus, we discussed that the abnormalities were in relation to uterine bleeding. Then there were abnormalities of the endometrium, where the endometrium was encroaching into the wall of the myometrium, and we also discussed the sister concern endometriosis, where the endometrium was in the other sides apart from the uterine cavity. So moving further to this discussion on the health of the uterus, today's topic would be on the benign lesions of the uterus. So moving from the endometrium, now we would be moving towards the myometrium. Also, in the last few sessions, we discussed abnormal uterine bleeding, and in that we classified it according to FIGO classification as a structural cause and non-structural cause. The structural cause, which was acronymed as PALM, in which the P stands for endometrial polyp. Mind you, it is endometrial polyp. Then A stands for adenomyosis, and L stands for leiomyoma, and M stands for malignancy. So the first three lesions, that is the endometrial polyp, the adenomyosis, and the leiomyoma uterus, the PAL part of the PALM, are the benign lesions of the uterus. And the M part, which is responsible for the abnormal uterine bleeding, is basically endometrial cancer or uterine cancer. So we discussed the adenomyosis part of AUB. And now we will be discussing the leiomyoma uterus or the fibroid part or the AUBL, and we would be differentiating it from the P part, that is endometrial polyps. Okay. So moving on to AUBL. Now, which is commonly known as fibroid, which you must have heard very many times, and we would be discussing all these in the next few minutes, would be related to fibroid. Now, fibroid has been named by very many, called by these names. It has been called as fibroleiomyoma, fibromas, fibromyomas, leiomyomas, which we will be designating today, myomas, uterine leiomyomas, uterine fibroids, uterine leiomyomatous lesions, and simply uterine myoma. So this is how you would find the vocabulary of myoma. So what are fibroids? Now these are all which are on various shapes and sizes are the fibroids. And today the topic of discussion would range from a few steps of definition, how prevalent it is, what are the risk factors, who gets fibroids, how do you classify fibroids, clinical manifestations, and in the next lecture we would be discussing diagnosis and management. So today we will restrict ourselves till the clinical manifestations. Now, certain known facts about fibroids. Fibroids are known to affect women for centuries, and it may be said that it is the commonest benign tumor of the uterus. So it is a benign tumor and it is the commonest benign tumor. It is the commonest benign tumor, solid tumor of the female. 20% of women of reproductive age group at any time of their life, sometimes you can say 50% of women in the reproductive age group at any time of their life may have fibroids. The most common age is from 35 to 45 years. And they are monoclonal benign tumors of the uterus arising from the smooth muscle of the myometrium. They consist, apart from the muscular tissue, they consist of heavy amount of extracellular matrix, which is basically collagen, fibronectin, elastin, and proteoglycan. The exact etiology of fibroid is not known, but what is known is that they have a monoclonal origin arising from the single cell rest either of the uterine smooth muscle or of the vessel wall. They have a genetic basis that is definite, and various growth factors are involved in their formation and in growth that is definite. So let us discuss one by one. The first important point is that these fibroids or lesions or myomas or leiomyomas, they develop from the smooth muscles of the uterus, that is from the myometrium. So this is a myometrial lesion. Okay. And then depending upon the amount of fibrous tissue along with it, it can have its name as fibromyoma. It can be simple myoma when it has only myometrium, and depending upon how much fibrous element it is attached to it, it may be the amount of fibrous tissue attached to it, there may be fibromyoma or fibromyomatous lesion that may be called. The second important thing is that it is a single cell which reproduces repeatedly. So single myocyte, we will see further, is the one which would repeatedly reproduce to form this lesion. And the lesion which is formed is a pale, firm, rubbery mass which is different from its neighboring tissue of myometrium. It usually gives a whorl-like appearance, and there is a blood vessel at the periphery of the tumor, and the core of the tumor is usually has a poor blood supply. So coming to the etiology, which is basically not very much known, but still the factors which are responsible for the etiology can be divided into three main groups: genetic factors, hormonal factors, and growth factors. Coming to genetic factors, what is known is they are monoclonal. That is, they arise from a single muscle cell of myometrium. And what are the chromosomal abnormalities which are found? We can see chromosomal abnormalities in up to 40% of cases of fibroids, and basically it can range from translocation to deletion to trisomy of various chromosomes. Coming to the hormonal influence, both estrogen and progesterone have influence on the growth of the fibroid, and as such the fibroid itself, de novo production of estrogen is seen in the fibroid tissue itself with the receptors of estrogen in it, and also to some extent the progesterone receptors are also increased in fibroid tissue. The third stimulating factor are the growth factors which increase once the fibroids are formed. There are certain growth factors which we will be discussing. They increase the smooth muscle proliferation, DNA synthesis, and angiogenesis. So basically it would revolve around three areas where we discuss the etiology of fibroids. So the question remains, what causes fibroid or what is their origin? It is still unclear. But hypothesis prevails that single smooth muscle cell of myometrium is the cause. Stimulus for the initial neoplastic transformation is still not known. But what we take as of now is that it is genetic and chromosomal, which we say that in 40% of the cases it can be deletion, translocations or rearrangements of the chromosomes. Somatic mutations in the myometrial cells may also cause for uncontrolled cell proliferation. Transforming growth factors stimulate the growth of the leiomyoma either directly or via estrogen. A positive family history is often present, and factors which have a role are polypeptide growth, or epidermal growth factor, insulin-like growth factors. We will see there are very many factors apart from this which help in the growth of the fibroid. So predominantly the fibroid is an estrogen dependent tumor. The estrogen and progesterone both are taken as a cause, but more so estrogen receptors are there. It has also been seen that the growth is not squarely distributed among fibroids, and therefore in a single uterus you may get fibroids of various sizes. Some may grow faster than the others. It is seen that fibroids are a very slow growing tumors. It takes 3 to 5 years for the fibroid to grow sufficiently to be felt per abdomen. This is in contrast to ovarian tumor, where the tumors of malignant origin grow within months. So benign lesions grow slowly. It is dependent on estrogen is evidenced by the fact that the growth potentiality is limited only during reproductive years. It is seen that the fibroids are seen mostly in the estrogen dependent or reproductive years. And it is also seen that the growth of the fibroid is increased during pregnancy and in high estrogen users. They do not occur before menarche, and following menopause either they cease to growth, or there is no new growth, or they shrink. So the estrogen becomes less, and therefore their growth stops, no new growth occurs, or at times it is seen that they shrink. So coming to now we have seen that there are initiators and there are promoters. So genetic and epigenetic factors are the initiators. And then what are the promoters? The promoters are the estrogen, progesterone and the growth factors we saw, and various cytokines and chemokines which are there. And of course we will discuss that it would also depend upon the extracellular matrix component, which would decide whether the muscle component would be more or the fibrous component would be more. So coming to having discussed the genetic part, now coming to the promoter part. The promoter of fibroid growth are estrogen and progesterone. And other growth factors are cytokines and chemokines. It has seen that the leiomyomas have an increased number of receptors of estrogen and progesterone. And the genetic alterations which we saw in this were basically translocation in 20% of the cases, and the chromosome involved was 12 and 14. Then there was a deletion in 12% of the cases, the chromosome involved was 7. And there was deletion in 17% of the cases where the chromosome involved was 12. Number 12. So some chromosomes are involved, basically translocation, deletion or various rearrangements of the chromosomes have been seen. So again discussing the uterine fibroid growth and development, the genetic and the epigenetic factors, then we would have estrogen and progesterone as a factor, and then we will have certain chemokines and cytokines as a factor, and then we will discuss what are the people who are at risk, the risk factors, what promotes their growth, and how is the extracellular matrix component involved. So we saw that non-random chromosomal changes such as translocation, duplication, deletions were identified in 50% of the hysterectomy specimens of the fibroid. We also discussed the majority were chromosome 7, 12 and 14 changes. No single gene disorder can be found in variety of cases, and once it is initiated, the growth factors, they play a role under the influence of the sex steroid hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And very many growth factors would be there. And what would the growth factors do? They would cause angiogenesis, apoptosis and extracellular matrix production. So the fact remains that the serum levels of estrogen and progesterone are similar in women with and without clinically detectable fibroids. So if if we take a serum of the patient, the measurement of the serum progesterone and serum estrogen, it was found that the patients who had fibroid and those who did not have fibroid was the same. So what was the reason? It was seen that the increased levels of aromatase within the fibroids was there, and the estrogen was produced de novo within the fibroid itself, which was higher than that produced in the normal myometrium. So progesterone also was important in pathogenesis of fibroid, and concentrations of progesterone receptors A and B were more compared to normal myometrium. Growth hormone releasing GnRH, if we gave, they decrease the size of fibroids, and therefore it showed that they are dependent on estrogen and progesterone. The growth factors, the proteins, the polypeptides are also produced locally by the smooth muscles and fibroblasts. They are basically responsible for increasing the extracellular matrix. And many of these growth factors are overexpressed in fibroids and either increase smooth muscle proliferation or increase extracellular matrix. And what are these growth factors? They are tumor growth factors, basic fibroid growth factors, epidermal growth factor, platelet derived growth factor. This tumor growth factor beta type promote mitogenesis, then insulin growth factors, prolactin, promote angiogenesis, and vascular endothelial growth factor, that is VGEF. These are the growth factors which have been found, which basically increase the extracellular matrix of the fibroid and also the smooth muscle proliferation because of this, once it is initiated by the genetic constitution. So coming to this picture, what is there? This is the normal muscle cells, smooth muscle cells of the uterine myometrium, the normal myocyte. And then there are genetic factors and tumor initiators which cause its somatic mutation. And this mutated myocyte under the influence of the estrogen and progesterone by ER induction, that is estrogen receptor induction, progesterone receptor induction, the growth factors which we named, the growth factor receptor induction, and extracellular matrix production, they all cause change in these myocytes. The clonal change occurs, the clonal expansion occurs, and this single cell becomes a myoma. Expanding it further, the myometrial stem cell was this. Now there were certain chromosomal mutations in this. And then this was the fibroid progenitor cell. Because of these mutations, it becomes a progenitor cell which would give rise to fibroid later. And then under the influence of these hormones, there was a transformation. And then it got differentiated into various types. The yellow ones are more of the fibrous elements, the pink ones are more of the smooth muscle elements, and the blue ones are more of the vascular elements. And so the changes occur in the fibrous tissue, in the vascular muscle, smooth muscle cells, in the myometrial smooth muscle cells, the changes occur. And these changes, the mediators were the growth factors. And also added to this were the environmental factors. So if depending on what diet that lady is taking, her vitamin D status, the hormones, the environmental toxins, these also added to it, and therefore it would cause proliferation, and then it would cause this single cell, myometrial cell, would cause this fibroid. And depending upon which of these are more, fibrous element is more, the muscle elements is more, you would ultimately label it as myoma or myofibroma or fibromyoma. If more of the fibrous, you call it fibromyoma. If it is only muscle, you call it myoma. So moving further, who gets these fibroids? Who gets these fibroids? So there are certain known factors, there are certain unknown factors. The red ones are those with an increased risk, and the blue ones are those with a decreased risk. We will be expanding each of them, but as of now, the age is an important factor starting from this end, and it is basically a disease of late reproductive years. Parity, nulliparous women have the more chances of fibroid. Early menarche, early onset of menses is a cause. It has a racial ethnic origin. African blacks have more chances of having fibroids. The diseases like hypertension, cardiovascular changes, these patients are at increased risk. Those with a first degree relatives, family history have increased chances. With a greater BMI, with a body mass index more than 35, obese patients have more chance. And those who have estrogens, taking estrogens like tamoxifen for breast cancer, they have a more likelihood, because estrogen dependent tumors, they may have, those who are on tamoxifen are more chances of having fibroids. On the other hand, if the lady is exercising, she has reached menopause, if she is more parous, multiparous, and smoking for any reason, has a lesser chance of having, there is a decreased risk of having fibroids. So we see that 70 to 80% of women, out of the 10 women, 80% of the women, 8 of them would have fibroids at any time of their life, and it is strongly related to their family. So increased risks are those with late reproductive, that is, it is a disease of 35 to 45 years. Nulliparous are more prone, those with early menarche and late menopause, African, first degree relative, obesity, that is high BMI, hypertension, heart disease, those with tamoxifen. Pregnancy causes an increase in the size of fibroids, and use of caffeine and alcohol increase it. On the other hand, exercise, parity, menopause decreases it. So taking one by one. Coming to age. Age, there is an increased risk of fibroid. The tumor thrives in the period of greatest ovarian activity. So advanced reproductive age, basically after 35, 40, 45 up to 50, they have increased chance, up to 20 times more chance of having fibroids. So much so that it is said that 50% to 60% of women would have fibroids at any time in their life. More, it is said that if the woman is of the age of 25 to 30 years, the distribution is at the age of 45 to 50 years, the distribution is 6.2 per 1,000 versus 0.3 per 1,000 if she gets it at a lower reproductive age. Coming to parity, parity reduces the risk by 3 to 5 fold. So it is seen that the nulliparous woman and infertile women have more chances of having fibroids. We would later see that infertility is both the cause and effect of the fibroid. What is the cause in nulliparous? It is said that continuous estrogen production, uninterrupted by pregnancy and lactation, is the most important factor in development of the fibroid or myoma. Coming to family history, first degree family relative who had fibroid before 45 years of age carries a 6 times more chance of having fibroid, so it runs in families. Diet, it is interesting to note that it is more common in non-veg than in veg, and red meat eating women have 3 times more chance than compared to the vegetarian counterpart. Coming to weight, BMI is an important factor. A BMI more than 35 is an important criteria for having fibroid, because it is said that the estrogen is in the fat cells of women. So for every 10 kg rise in the weight, there is 18% increase in the incidence of fibroid. Coming to blood pressure, per 10 millimeter rise of diastolic blood pressure causes 10% increase in the fibroid. The reason being, there is a damage to endothelium, there is release of cytokines which irritates and stimulates the smooth muscles to cause changes in the myocyte. The degree of fibroids were proportionate to severity of hypertension. It is seen that the fibroid is a very slow growing benign tumor. It is seen that the average growth is about 1.25 centimeter in 2.5 years. So it's a slow growth. And recurrence of the fibroid after removal, that is myomectomy, by the end of 5 years is 10 to 20%. And 10 to 20% of the cases may require second surgery. So it is a tumor which is slow growing, and is a tumor which is recurrent. Coming to malignant transformation, it is very rare. If there is a change in the size of the fibroid, and basically the malignant transformation causes a change in the size of the fibroid suddenly starts growing fast. A slow growing tumor starts suddenly growing fast, but basically it is in the postmenopausal period where the incidence is 2%. In the premenopause, the chance of getting it malignant is less than 1%. The chances who are at risk, the patients with a pelvic inflammatory disease, especially those with a chlamydial infection, have a more chances of having fibroid. Those using contraceptives with a high dose of estrogen have more chances of fibroid. We discussed the decreased risk in menopause because the ovarian estrogen secretion decreases and therefore there can be regression. If they are using oral contraceptives, again with a very low dose of estrogen, it can decrease. Parity, of course, favors and there is a decreased risk. The smoking, cigarette, bidi, etc. have decreased estrogen levels, it is said, and therefore it decreases fibroid. And low dose contraceptive we discussed. Now moving further to characteristics of fibroid. Now these are the characteristics of fibroids. It comes in various sizes. The shape may be spherical, it can be flattened, it can be pointed, any type of it. If you cut these fibroids, they would be pale, and then the rest of the uterine muscle. If you see their consistency, you try to feel it, they would be soft in pregnancy, depending upon the degenerative changes, it can be cystic, it can be vascular, it can be inflammatory, and if they become very hard, you should think of calcification. They have a capsule, that is, they have a pseudocapsule. What is this pseudocapsule? It is basically compressed normal surrounding muscle fibers, which are these fibers which are compressed at the outer end form a capsule, and therefore it is called a pseudocapsule, and the blood supply comes from this capsule. And this is the very important point to differentiate a myoma from the adenomyosis, where in both of the cases there is thickening of the muscle layer or the myometrium, but myoma has a pseudocapsule, adenomyosis doesn't have a pseudocapsule. So this is a differential diagnosis with adenomyosis. Blood supply, it nourishes the myoma. The capsule has in its periphery the vascular content, and it nourishes the myoma from the periphery, and the most of the time the center of the myoma, the center of the tumor is relatively avascular. We will expand on each of this. So coming to the size. Fibroids come in all shapes and sizes. They can range from a small pie to a big melon. And this is how you explain it to the patient also. It can be of this size, it can be of this size. So you can have all shapes and sizes of fibroid. And what you explain to the patient, like if they are like this, you explain it to the patient that you have a small fibroid up to 5 centimeter and it is like a shape of a lemon. And if it is a medium size, you would say that it is like a large lemon. And then if it is more, then you can say that it is like a mango or it is like a watermelon size, and this is how you designate it, that it is 5 centimeter or it is 7.5 centimeter or it is 9 centimeter or 11 centimeters. It can be as big as 40 centimeter in size. So these can be the various sizes in how you explain it to patient that you have a benign tumor of these sizes which has to be dealt with. So the patient can present with such a huge tumor, such a huge abdomen, which may not be pregnancy, but it may be fibroid. And it cannot be a single fibroid, but it can be multiple fibroid in the same uterus. So you can have this picture, you can have this picture. So this is the naked eye appearance. Now you can have a single fibroid with a uniform enlargement of the uterus. You can have multiple fibroid which may be distorted and multinodular in this. When you try to palpate it on feel, they are firm. When you try to cut it, it is smooth and whitish in appearance, and there may be degenerative changes, and if there is an absence of degenerative changes, what you see is a whorled appearance. What is whorled appearance? This is the whorled appearance. This is the whorled appearance. This is normal myometrium, and this is the whorled appearance of the that is, it comes in circles, and whorled appearance and trabeculations. And this is due to because of the intermingling of the fibrous tissue with the muscle bundles. So between the muscle bundles, the fibrous tissue encroaches, and therefore it gives a whorled appearance to the fibroid. This appearance is different from this appearance. This appearance is different from this appearance. So they have a different appearance. You can make it out different from the rest of the myometrium, and this is because the fibrous element has been added to the myometrial element, and it has a different single myocyte has become whorled in shape. So it has a smooth muscle and connective tissue. Now coming to the false capsule, which is called a pseudocapsule, because basically it is not a capsule, but it is the compressed adjacent myometrium. They have more parallel arrangements here instead of mixed arrangement, and they are more pinkish because of the blood supply. So the periphery would be pinkish because it has more blood supply, blood supply here, and therefore it would be pinkish, and the muscle fibers in this area are compressed. They are in contrast, there is a whitish of tumor in the middle. The capsule is separated from the growth by a thin loose areolar tissue. Now at this area the capsule would be separated from the rest of the myometrium, and the blood vessels run in this plane. This is the plane where the tumor can be shelled out during myomectomy operation. So at the capsule area you can shell it out the myometrium at this area. The periphery of the tumor is more muscular, we noticed, therefore that has a more growth potentiality. The center of the tumor is least vascular, and therefore it has more chances to degenerate. And due to the contraction of the false capsule, when you cut out, it would a little bulge. You would see that the rest of the myometrium if you see by 3D, you would see that it is a bulging out of the surface because the capsule then contracts. Coming to microscopic appearance, these are the microscopic appearance. You get a fibrous element and you get a smooth muscle element. You get a pseudocapsule in it. Originally it consists of only muscle elements, later fibrous tissue elements intermingle with the muscle elements, and such the nomenclature of fibroid would be according to the elements which it has. Coming to the classification of leiomyoma according to location. This is a submucosal fibroid or leiomyoma because it is in the mucosa. It is coming from the mucosa. It is just beneath the endometrium and it is going into the cavity. So it is beneath the endometrium. Now this is intramural purely, that is, it is lying within the muscle wall of the myometrium. And this is purely serous, that is, it is projecting out of the myometrium. So it is outside the cavity. So this can be in a single uterus, they can be, all the three can be present, they can be multiple. We will classify it accordingly. So the subserosal, the third one is beneath the serosa. So the peritoneum which was lining would go around it because ultimately it is coming out from the myometrium. So the peritoneum which was normally lining this, the peritoneum would go around it like this and then it would carry on with this. So it was just beneath the peritoneum. So it is the peritoneum in case of uterus is called serosa and therefore it is called as a subserosa. Here this is intramural, that is within the substance of the myometrium. So it is surrounded by myometrium only. Now here we are calling it submucosal. Because it is no mucosa of the endometrium, we call it as mucosa of the lining is we call as mucosa. So here it is arising from the myometrium, but the covering would be that of the endometrium. Here the endometrium it would cover, the mucosa would be covered and therefore it becomes a just beneath the mucosa, so it would be submucosal, and its origin here would be from the mucosa. Its origin here would be from the muscle, and here also it would be from the muscle. They can also involve the cervix, although less 8%, but most frequently from the body. Coming to submucous, that is 5% of the cases. The intramural fibroids, when pushed towards the cavity underneath the endometrium, becomes the submucosal fibroid. The uterine cavity at this stage, the anatomy is distorted and the uterine cavity becomes irregular. At times they may be sessile, that is, they may be attached with a broad base, or at times they may have a stalk or a pedicle, and then they call as a pedunculated submucous fibroid. And they may grow, they may outgrow to reach up to the cervix and may protrude beyond the cervix as such. And because the lower part of this polyp gets least blood supply, it gets infected and ulcerated and may be the cause of the intermenstrual bleeding. This variety, submucous variety, is less common, but it is most important because it distorts the cavity and produces the maximum symptoms, and one of the symptoms is abnormal uterine bleeding. Classifying it according to the European Society, the submucous fibroid were classified into 3 types. The type 0, where no intramural intervention. Type 1, that is, it is purely submucous type, where the myometrium, it has not encroaching into the myometrium. And then type 1, where it is less than 50%, where it is type 1, that is 50% is in the cavity, 50% is in the myometrium. And type 2, where more than 50% is in the myometrium and less of it is in the cavity. So basically these are less pedunculated, and this is more likely to be a pedunculated, the type 0. But we are not using this classification. This was the old classification. Now differentiating it from the fibroid polyp from the endometrial polyp. At the beginning of the discussion, I discussed that AUB can be because of AUBP, that is endometrial polyp. And we have also seen that there are some of the fibroids which get pedunculated and they are there in the cavity, and those are fibroid polyps. So what is the basic difference between the AUBP and AUBL, which is a polyp form? So this is basically, the polyps are abnormal growth from the endometrium. They have no myometrial component. Basically, when you cut and subject it to histopathology, this type of polyp would have muscle layers into it, and then you would call it as a fibroid polyp. Both are caused by the hormones. This is basically, the polyps are basically estrogen based. This is basically estrogen and progesterone both based. Both increase in response to estrogen, but fibroid polyp more so because of the high hormonal levels. They can be pedunculated sessile. Most of the polyps are pedunculated sessile, but basic feature is that they are multiple in number. And fibroid polyp are basically, they can be pedunculated sessile, but they are also have an intramural component or subserosal component, or type 1, type 2, that is half of it is in the cavity, half of it is in the myometrium, or they can be multiple subserosal or elements also. So they can be, these are also affected by growth factors, these are not. These are basically endometrium based, so estrogen based. The main symptoms in case of endometrial polyp is bleeding. It can be frequent spots, it can be postmenopausal bleeding, it can be bleeding after exercise or sexual intercourse, and pain is less. In this case, it is painful. Basically, these fibroid polyps have a painful heavy menstrual bleeding. It can have pressure symptoms. These symptoms are more or less similar to the symptoms of the fibroid. Diagnosis is by both. Here hysteroscopy has a role, and polypectomy cures it. Here the transvaginal sonography and MRI have a role, and hysterectomy and myomectomy cures it. So there are various charts given in your books of relating to differentiating between polyps and fibroids. So basically this is the diagram of polyps, where there are multiple small polyps which are in the cavity, and this is basically the fibroid polyp, where it is basically, this is a sessile one, you can have a pedunculated one. So basically polyps are endometrial tissue, they are basically muscle tissue. Polyps are non-cancerous, but some may become malignant. The same holds true with fibroids, basically non-cancerous. They develop in the women of 40 to 50 years, that is same for here. Polyps do not usually cause pain, these cause pain. They are very small, few millimeters to diameter. They are finger-like growths that project outward from the uterine wall, and they could be as small as a seed. And usually the polyps cause infertility because they are affecting the cavity, and polyps are round or oval, and they basically cause bleeding and pain. What would be the fate of submucous polyps? So this is the diagram. This is, if you can appreciate, this is the fibroid. This is one polyp which has a typical world appearance. This is the uterine and this is the cervix. This is the cervix. Now this fibroid polyp, which was originating from the fundus of the uterus with a big stalk, has outgrown the cervix, it has dilated the cervix, and it is projecting into the vagina, and this is a long pedunculated fibroid polyp. So here because of the gravity, because it would the pedicle, the feeding vessel would be somewhere here, and the core would be somewhere here, and this by the gravity would have least amount of blood vessel. So least amount of blood vessel, this is the surface necrosis which occurs. Here is the point where it would get infected, and this is the point where it got degenerated, and this is the changes which occur. So the fibroid submucous polyp can have surface necrosis, it can have a long pedicle formation, it can have infection, and it can have degeneration. Submucous polyp contain more of the smooth muscle elements. This is in general, because you would see that the serous polyps, the subserous polyps would have more of the fibrous elements. So in general, the mucous polyps have more of the muscle elements. In postmenopause, where rest of the myometrium shrinks, they may disproportionately greater than the myoma. The myometrium shrinks in the menopause, where the estrogen is less, the whole of the uterus becomes small. And this shrinkage is seen more on the uterus than on the myoma. As such, the myometrium shrinks more than the myoma, and therefore this projects out. Intramural myoma may become submucous after menopause. So that which was lying in the cavity, because of the shrinkage of the uterus, may protrude out in menopause. Coming to the next variety, that is the interstitial variety or the intramural variety. That is, the fibroid lies inside the muscle layers or in the myometrium. Most of the fibroids are intramural, that is 75% of the fibroids are intramural. Initially all the fibroids are intramural, and then some are pushed towards the cavity, then they become submucous, some are pushed towards serosa, they become subserosa, and 70% or 75% persist in their position. There are several types of fibroids. They may be anterior intramural fibroids when they are located onto the anterior wall. It can be posterior intramural fibroids where they are located to the posterior wall. They can be fundal fibroids located on the upper part of the uterus, and intramural fibroids can range from small p to large grapefruit we discussed. This is the subperitoneal or subserous fibroid. This is 15%. Here the intramural fibroid is pushed outwards towards the peritoneal cavity. These fibroids are either partially or completely covered by peritoneum. When completely covered by peritoneum, it attains the, now when it gets completely covered, it attains a pedicle. Pedicle means a stalk where it is attached to. This becomes thin, and at times this pedicle may get torn or get detached, and then this fibroid starts getting nutrition from the neighboring structures, basically omentum or mesentery, and it gets adhered to and gets nourishment from these. And such which has lost its contact with the uterus become wandering fibroids, because they are not in the uterus but in the abdominal cavity, and since they are drawing nutrition from omentum or mesentery, they are called as parasitic fibroids. So these fibroids may be at times, this is one variety, and then at times they may be pushed in between the layers of the broad ligament, and then they become false or pseudofibroid. That is, they arise from this wall and they, instead of going into the peritoneal side, they go into the in between the layers of the broad ligament. They start going into the broad ligament, and then they are called as false or pseudofibroids. We will differentiate the false and pseudo broad ligamentary fibroid from the true broad ligamentary fibroids. We saw in general that there is a subserous has more of the connective tissue, and the submucous has more of the muscle tissue. So this subserous fibroid can have multiple subserous elements, and they have a multiple connective tissue, the third variety. They project outward from the uterine cavity covered by peritoneum, may reach large size. Greater than 50% of the fibroid mass must project beyond the myometrium for the fibroid to be classified as subserosal. Then otherwise it would be intramural. They can be pedunculated. Now coming to broad ligamentary fibroid. This is an interesting fibroid, although extremely rare, and you divide it into, this is the diagrammatic presentation which will help you to understand. Now this is the uterus, and this is the uterine lining, and this is the fibroid which is originating from its lateral wall. We saw that the fundal went into the peritoneum, and then it becomes this. It could be anterior wall when it would push into the bladder, then it could be posterior wall when it would be pushing into the rectum, and then it could be cervical when it growing in downwards. Now what about lateral? When it grows laterally into the space which is in the lateral side is the broad ligament. So it starts growing into the broad ligament, and what happens is that here the fibroid is originating from the lateral wall of the uterus or from the lateral wall of the cervix, and it gains its size, and it gains what is this pink part? This pink part is the ureter. So the differentiation between a false and a true broad ligamentary fibroid is that as it grows, and this is the normal site where the ureter lies, as you have seen, this, because it is growing from the wall, it pushes the ureter to the lateral side. So when you do sonography, or when you do this kidney function test for this patient, you would see that the ureter lies in the lateral to the fibroid, and so this is the false broad ligamentary fibroid or pseudo. What about true? The true broad ligamentary fibroids arises from either the round ligament, or from the ovarian ligament, or from the connective tissue of the ovarian or uterine vessels. So it would be true broad ligamentary fibroids arising from the ligaments of the broad ligament. And when it arises from the ligaments like round ligament or uterovarian ligament, the ureter would lie medial to it. So true broad ligamentary fibroid will have ureter which is lying medial to it. This is the differentiating feature. What is the complication of broad ligament? This is the broad ligamentary fibroids. You see the uterus, you see the cervix, and you see the broad ligament. So this is mistaken as a TO-mass. That is a tubo-ovarian mass would be like this also. This is a broad ligamentary solid fibroid, while this is a tube and ovary, basically a hydrosalpinx or an ectopic, or it can be an ectopic pregnancy, it can be tube and ovary mass, it can be hydrosalpinx, it can be parasitic leiomyoma which has detached from its subperitoneum and is wandering about, so parasitic, or it can be pedunculated subserous. So that is a differential diagnosis of broad ligament. What are the complications? This can twist itself and cause torsion. It can of course undergo cystic degeneration, and therefore it would mimic like malignancy. Then it is a pseudo-Meeks syndrome is a differential complication of this fibroid. The huge broad ligament fibroid can press on the ureter, and therefore it can cause hydroureter and hydronephrosis with a back pressure, and there can be necrosis inside this fibroid. So this is a broad ligamentary fibroid. This is the uterus. This is the uterus. This is the other side. This is the tube. This is the ovary. This is the tube. This is the round ligament. This is the ovary. And now here the fibroid is. This is the fibroid area which is growing. So transvaginal sonography, typical leiomyoma has a whorled appearance. What is the bridging vessel sign? This confirms its uterine origin. When you put color on this, when you do a color Doppler, you can see the feeding vessels which are coming from this, and therefore it is called as a bridging vessel sign, which confirms its uterine origin. And of course, when you do a Kitty function test and you put a dye and you see that the ureter is medial to the mass or lateral to the mass, and we differentiate true and false. And the management of this is that you have to remove the fibroid by hysterectomy. We discussed this parasitic of wandering. So this is a hysteroscopic picture. This is the wall of the uterus. This is the pedicle, and this is what you see is the fibroid. And you can appreciate that this is the omentum and this is the bowel. So this fibroid is lying within the abdominal cavity, and at times it can get detached from this area, and it can get its support like this. These are the vessels which are getting its support from this omentum is supplying it, and the bowel is supplying it, the mesentery is supplying it. So it becomes a parasitic fibroid by the blood vessels. It starts feeding vessels from this. At times these subserosal fibroids may adhere to the surrounding vascular viscera, draw nutrition from it, become detached from the uterus and completely free, and wander and become parasitic. There is an entity called cervical fibroid. Appreciate the MRI. So this is the uterine cavity, this is the uterus, and this is the white area is the cervix area, and this is the bladder, this is the rectum. This is the bladder and this is the rectum. This is the rectum part. See the locules, and this is the bladder. So this white area is the cervical fibroid. It's rare, 1% of the cases. It basically in the cervix, which is in the supravaginal part, not in the vaginal part of the cervix. It can be interstitial type, that is within the walls of the cervix. It can be subperitoneal as it grows into the broad ligament, or it can form as a polyp or polypoidal. Depending upon the position, it can also in the anterior wall, in the posterior wall, in the lateral wall, or it can be central, forming a polyp. The interstitial growth may displace the cervix or expand it, so much so that the external loss is difficult to diagnose. That is distension, as we saw in one of the pictures, that it causes cervical dilatation. Because of the huge polyp, the cervix gets distended, and this distension may be the cause of the pain in such patients. Of course, it disturbs the pelvic anatomy, especially the ureter anatomy is disturbed. And there can be pressure symptoms according to fibroid, whether it is lying on the anterior wall, posterior wall, or in the fundal area. So this is the picture. This is the cervical fibroid by diagrammatic picture, and this is the cervical fibroid by the hysteroscopy or laparoscopy picture. They are relatively uncommon. They are the greatest surgical difficulty because of their position. They are relatively inaccessible. When you go by the abdomen, they become inaccessible. They have a close proximity to bladder and ureter, so likely to be injured. The enlargement causes displacement of the uterus upwards. Suppose here it is enlarging here, so uterus gets displaced upwards. The fibroid may become impact. It may be so large that it will occupy the whole of the pelvis, and the uterus may be pushed up, so it may impact the pelvis. And as such, because the ureter is lying here, because the bladder is lying in front, it can cause urinary retention and ureteric obstruction. If such a patient of a cervical fibroid is pregnant and she goes into the labor, because of cervical fibroid, it may prevent the descent of the head and result in obstructed labor. If it is on the anterior surface, it may cause urinary symptoms. And sometimes if it is in such a position that you are doing cesarean section, you may have to they may have a complicated cesarean section, for you have to cut the fibroid to go to the in the lower segment fibroid, you have to go to the cavity of the uterus. So coming to the classification. This classification of FIGO, which you have already discussed, so I will rush through it. And this AUB is we classified under, depending upon the type of bleeding, we classified into palm coin. And we also classified by European classification into level 1 as AUB-A, level 2 as submucosal and others, and level 3 as 0 to 8. So FIGO menstrual classification working group, we describe it into primary, secondary and tertiary, and basis of this classification was location, and relationship was in reference to the endometrium and visceral peritoneum. We divided it into primary, where it was absent or present, that is the fibroid was absent or present. We divided into secondary, that it was whether it was submucous or it was other. And again we divided into tertiary, that is there were 8 varieties of it, out of which 0 was the submucous variety, that is it is pedunculated and in the cavity. 1 was, and 2 was, and 3 was. Basically it was about the component where it goes into the encroaches into the myometrium. So in 1 there was less than 50% encroachment into the myometrium, in 2 it was more than 50% encroachment, and in 3 the intramural component contains most of it, but it was still touching the endometrium, the red line. The 4 was purely intramural, that is not touching the endometrium, not touching the serosa. The 5 again, was 5, 6 and 7 were basically like the first 3. So 5 was basically protruding into the peritoneum, subserosal elements with more towards 50% towards the intramural, that is it was 5. 6 was basically it was protruding into the peritoneum, but the subserosal it was less than 50% was intramural. So here also you are taking less than more than 50% as intramural. Here also you are taking less than and more than 50% as intramural. By 7 we have reached like 0, purely subserous variety, that is with a pedunculated variety. And like if it was a cervical and parasitic fibroid, we labeled it as 8. So this is how we divided it into FICO. The primary system we discussed was presence or absence. Secondary system we discussed that it was submucous or others, and this we did by sonography, by hysteroscope or saline salpingography. And the tertiary were basically we divided it into 8, where 8 was the parasitic. So leiomyoma, in the palm coin classification, the leiomyoma we described into submucous and other, and then we classified as 0 pedunculated, 1 less than 50, 2 here it is all intramural, from 3 it is only contacting endometrium, the 4 it is purely intramural, we discussed this, and 5, 6 are basically subserosal, the 7 becomes purely subserosal, 8 is cervical or parasitic. Now we also discussed that at times when the fibroid is such that it contacts the endometrium also and contacts the serosa also, it is such a huge fibroid, then we divide it by hyphae. So we divided by hyphae. So this 2 and 5 was a fibroid where it was encroaching the endometrium also, and it was encroaching the serosa also. So it was 2-5, where the first point would be towards the endometrial cavity and the second number would be towards the serosal cavity. So 4 is 100% intramural and 8 is cervical and parasitic, to remember. Also we discussed that the hyphen indicates that there is a large fibroid which both the elements. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is 100% intramural. Again with 5 we started going outside. 5, then 6 is subserosal, 7 is serosal, and 2 and 5 is the submucosal elements in both. Just it is 11 o'clock, so I will stop here with the vascular supply, and I would continue in the next lecture. That would be on the next Thursday. On coming Monday, you would have a online quiz exam, and I would detail with you the what would be the criteria for this exam. And I would be taking 2 exams, one on 11th of May, and the next exam would be in the first week of June, but would cover the lectures of May. And both of these, the marks of both of these would be counted as first internal exam, which was due between the 1st June and 15th of June. Seeing to the circumstances, we are taking an online exam, but it would be a proper exam. And the marks of it, both of the exam, that is the marks of the May and the marks of the April and May, would be added up to give you complete of the complete marks of the first internal examination between the 1st and 15th of June. So as of now, I sign off, and on the next Thursday, I would be continuing with this lecture, online lecture, and on Monday of 11th May, I will be taking your first exam. So thank you all. I can see 135 attendees. Okay, thank you.